Nobody at the Cedar Ridge sale barn understood why Mara Quinn paid $500 for 11 calves nobody else wanted. They were small, ribby, rough-haired things, crowded into the back corner of the pen like they were trying to disappear into one another. A couple had dried mud up to their knees. One had a bald patch along its neck. Another stood with its head low enough that the auctioneer stopped talking for half a second and looked at it like he was wondering whether it would stay upright until the gate opened. Wade Mercer laughed before the bidding was even finished. 11 veterinary bills, he said loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. A few men laughed with him. Mara raised her card one more time. $500. The gavel came down. 7 months later, after the rain had stopped coming and half the county had turned the color of old rope, Wade Mercer was hauling hay into pastures that had not grown anything in weeks. Mara's 52 acres were not green exactly, but they were still alive. And every morning, over the little stock pond everybody had told her to fill in, thousands of dragonflies lifted into the heat like sparks. If you had driven past from the county road, you might have thought the dragonflies were the reason. They were not. The Cedar Ridge sale barn sat between a farm supply store and a tire shop on the south side of town, and in August, the place smelled like hot metal, manure, diesel fuel, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. By 6:30, most of the good cattle were gone. The registered pairs had sold. The heavy-bred cows had sold. The clean groups of black calves had gone to buyers, with long trailers and numbers on their caps. What came through near the end were the odd lots. 1 lame cow, 3 mismatched steers, a bull with a bad eye. Then pen 47 opened. 11 calves came through together. The auctioneer glanced at his sheet. Mixed heifers, estimated 5 to 6 months. Estate clean out, no papers here today. That was about all he gave them. Nobody leaned forward. Mara did. She owned 52 acres outside Millstone, which was not enough land to impress anybody in that room. It was enough land to owe money on. Her grandfather had run cows there when grass was cheap and diesel was cheaper. Her father had sold most of the original place after a bad stretch of years, and what Mara had left was the house, the barn, 2 fields, a stock pond that leaked around the edges, 14 commercial cows, an old gooseneck trailer, and a note at Millstone Community Bank that arrived every month whether the cattle market was good or not. She was 39. She had spent 12 years working for a large animal veterinary practice before coming home to take care of her father. She had been the person holding gates, setting up chutes, labeling blood tubes, cleaning instruments, recording weights, and listening while veterinarians explained why one animal recovered and another did not. She had learned something in those years that did not look impressive from the bleachers. Sick and worthless were not the same thing. Neither were thin and poorly built. The 11 calves were thin. That much was obvious. But Mara was looking at their feet. The toes were even. The pasterns were not collapsing. The hocks were clean. She was looking at their backs too. Even under the rough hair, several of them were wider through the rib than they first appeared. Then one heifer lifted her head. Her eyes were bright, not happy, not comfortable, but present. Mara looked down the line. Most of them had the same narrow white tag in the left ear. Faded blue plastic. 2 numbers. And underneath the number, pressed into the tag, a tiny mark that looked like a circle broken by a short horizontal line. She had seen that mark before. She could not remember where. That bothered her enough to keep looking. The auctioneer asked for $1,000. Nothing. $750. Nothing. $500. Mara raised her card. Wade Mercer sat near the center aisle where he usually sat, one ankle across the opposite knee. He owned a little over 6,000 acres west of town and ran enough cattle that people said Mercer's place, the way they said the highway or the river, as though it were part of the geography. Wade was not stupid. That mattered. He knew cattle. He knew markets. He knew pasture. He also knew everybody in the room knew that he knew those things, and after 30 years, that had become almost as important to him as the knowing itself. When Mara bid, he turned. 500? The auctioneer pointed at her. Got 5, need 6. Nobody moved. Wade looked at the calves, then at Mara. Better come with a free vet. The men around him smiled. Mara kept her card in her lap. The gavel dropped. $500. 11 heifer calves. Wade shook his head. 11 veterinary bills. This time the laugh spread farther. Mara stood, picked up her purse, and walked toward the office. She did not answer him. She had learned a long time ago that there were rooms where answering a joke only gave it another 5 minutes to live. She wanted the calves. That was enough. By the time she backed her trailer into the loading alley, the sun was low and orange behind the grain elevator. The calves came up the ramp badly. Too fast at first, then not at all. Mara moved slowly and let them find the trailer instead of forcing them into it. When the last one stepped inside, she latched the gate and climbed onto the fender. Up close, they looked worse. There were lice eggs along some of the hair shafts. 2 had scours dried under their tails. 1 was breathing a little too fast. But the eyes still bothered her. Too much life in them for cattle everybody had dismissed in 20 seconds. She reached through the slats and turned one of the faded blue tags. Circle. Line through the bottom third. She stared at it. Somewhere in her memory, that mark belonged to something. She just could not pull the name out yet. Mara got home after dark. Her place sat at the end of a gravel road where the hills flattened out toward a shallow creek. The stock pond was behind the barn. It had once been nearly an acre of open water. Now half of it was shallow mud, willow sprouts, cattails, and a rim of bare dirt where cows had walked down the bank for years. Her neighbor called it the mosquito factory. Mara called it unfinished work. She put the calves in the quarantine lot away from her cows, filled 2 troughs, put grass hay in front of them, and stopped herself from doing anything else. That was the first hard thing. Not fixing too much at once. Dr. Calvin Ross came the next morning. He was 58, sunburned across the bridge of his nose, and had been driving ranch roads long enough to identify most clients by their gait before he saw the mailbox. He spent almost 2 hours with the calves. Temperatures, fecal samples, mucous membranes, lungs, feet, hydration. He listened to the little heifer Mara had worried about twice. Then he leaned against the fence and pulled off 1 glove. They're rough. I know. They've got parasites. They've been underfed. At least 3 are significantly anemic. They've probably been through a hard weaning and then got bounced around after that. Mara waited. Ross looked back at the calves. But I don't see 11 dying calves. That was what she had been waiting for. What do you see? 11 calves, somebody quit managing. There was a difference. Over the next month, Mara did work so ordinary, nobody would have driven out to watch it. She treated parasites on Ross's schedule instead of dumping everything into them at once. She fed good hay, then a little more. She added a balanced mineral. She kept the grain conservative. She checked water twice a day because weak calves can stand 6 feet from a dirty trough and still not drink enough. She weighed them with a tape every Sunday morning. Not because the tape was perfect, because doing it the same way every week showed direction. She wrote every number into a yellow notebook she kept inside an old metal mailbox nailed to the barn wall. Calf 12, 418 pounds. Calf 17, 396. Calf 21. Loose stool improving. Calf 24. Cough gone. The notebook became the one place where nobody's opinion mattered. Numbers either moved or they did not. By the third week, they moved. Not dramatically. 6 pounds here, 9 there. Then 12. Hair began to slick down across their shoulders. One calf that had spent its first week hanging back at the trough started pushing between two others to get there first. Mara noticed all of it. So did Wade Mercer. He stopped his truck beside her fence one afternoon in September. Mara was pounding a fiberglass post into the ground with a rubber mallet. White polywire ran from the corner of the barn lot across what had once been one open pasture. Wade lowered his window. "You building a maze?" "Paddocks." He looked at the thin wire. "For cattle?" "That's the plan. You know they can walk through that." "If it's off?" Wade smiled. Mara kept working. He looked past her toward the quarantine lot. "Your investment alive?" "All 11. For now." He let that hang there. Then he nodded toward the south field. "I heard you've been talking to the bank." Mara stopped pounding. That information irritated her more than the joke at the auction. Wade continued. "If you ever decide 52 acres is more trouble than it's worth, I'd make you a clean offer. Your south line fits mine. I'm not selling. You don't know the number. I know the answer." Wade studied her for a second. Then his eyes went back to the polywire. "Well, when the calves eat all this down, give me a call." He drove away. Mara finished the line before dark. She divided the ranch into 7 grazing paddocks. Not fancy ones. Not perfect ones. Some were temporary. Some were crooked because the terrain was crooked. She ran a water line from the well to 2 movable troughs, so cattle did not have to walk to the same mud hole every day. She fenced most of the stock pond bank away from direct cattle access and installed a small gravel approach on one side. She cut young cedar and willow where they had choked airflow. Then she did something her father would have called wasting good ground. She left a strip of vegetation around much of the pond. Native sedges, rushes, short grass, plants that held soil where runoff entered. She seeded bare areas rather than scraping them clean. When rain came, she wanted water to arrive slower and leave cleaner. Ross approved of the cattle work. For the pond, he told her to call the county extension office. That was how Elena Park first came to the Quinn place. Elena was 29, had a master's degree in rangeland ecology, and had the deeply inconvenient habit of asking why 5 times after most people were satisfied with the first answer. She walked the pond. She looked at the grass. She dug into the soil with a small spade. She asked Mara how long cattle usually stayed in each pasture. Used to be until the grass looked short. And now? 3 to 5 days. How long are you resting it? Depends. 25 to 40. Elena nodded. Better question. What? Instead of asking how long they graze, ask how long the plants get to recover. Mara wrote that down. By November, the calves no longer looked like the same animals. They were not fat. Mara did not want them fat. But their ribs had softened under new flesh. Their backs were wider. Their coats were losing the dead brown fuzz and turning smooth. The smallest heifer had gained 73 pounds. The largest had gained a little over 100. Ross came out for a follow-up and stood at the fence looking at them. Now I'm interested. You weren't before? I was medically interested before. He pointed at the group. Now I'm cattle interested. Mara laughed. That same week, she finally remembered the ear tag. Not the name, just the place she had seen it. Years earlier at the veterinary clinic, a breeder from north of the county had brought in a group of donor cows for reproductive work. Every record sheet had carried a little symbol in the corner. Circle. Short line. She could still see it printed beside the herd number. She told Ross. He took a photo of the tag. Maybe somebody at the breed office knows it. Maybe. Neither of them expected much. Winter passed. Then spring came early. The pond filled after 2 good rains. The fenced banks greened. Tadpoles appeared in the shallows. Tiny fish Mara had not stocked flashed near the reeds, probably washed in through the drainage or carried as eggs by birds. Then one morning in late April, Mara noticed the dragonflies. There were maybe 20. Big blue darners and smaller red ones darting low over the water. She watched them for a minute while she filled a trough. The next week there were hundreds. By May, there were so many that Tessa Bell from the feed store pulled her truck over on the county road just to look. What in the world did you do? Nothing to them. The dragonflies moved over the pond in layers. Some skimmed inches above the surface. Others hovered over the grass. When mosquitoes rose in the shade, the dragonflies cut through them so fast your eyes could barely follow. At sunrise, when the air was still, hundreds sat on fence wires and grass stems with their wings shining in the light. By 8, the whole pond seemed to be moving. Word got around. It always did. People started slowing down near Mara's place. A local teacher brought her 2 boys one Saturday morning. A neighbor asked if she had bought dragonfly eggs online. Someone at the diner said she was using them instead of fly spray. By the end of the week, the story had improved itself enough that Mara was supposedly breeding insects as a commercial livestock treatment. She called Elena before the story got any better. Elena came out with a camera and insect net, stood by the pond for half an hour, and then laughed. What? You accidentally made good habitat. That's all? That's a lot. She explained it plainly. Dragonflies spend most of their lives as aquatic nymphs. They need water long enough to complete that part of the cycle. They need vegetation. They need insects to eat. Adults eat mosquitoes, midges, flies, and whatever else they can catch. But they were not a replacement for herd health management. They were not treating worms in cattle. They were not curing disease. They had not restored the calves. Feed had done that. Medicine had done that. Clean water had done that. Pasture management had done that. The dragonflies had shown up because the pond and the land around it had become a place where dragonflies could live. Mara liked that explanation. Mostly because it was less exciting than the rumor. She wrote the date in the yellow notebook. Then June arrived, and the rain stopped. At first, nobody worried. June gets dry. Then July came in hot. Not afternoon hot, morning hot. The kind where the hood of a truck is already warm before breakfast. The forecast kept showing small chances of rain that disappeared 2 days before they were supposed to arrive. Ponds dropped. Creeks stopped moving. Pastures changed color from green to pale green to yellow. By the first week of August, the county had gone 38 days without meaningful rain, then 45, then 52. At Mercer Ranch, 6,000 acres did what 6,000 acres always does. It turned a small problem into a logistical one. Wade had cattle spread across pastures miles apart. Several old ponds got too low. One well pump failed. Water had to be hauled. Hay that had cost $65 a bale in spring climbed past $100. Then higher. The cattle started concentrating around the remaining water. Grass disappeared fastest, where they stood longest. Dust replaced cover. Flies gathered where animals gathered. Wade had employees, equipment, money. He was not helpless. But everything he needed to fix came multiplied by hundreds of cattle and thousands of acres. Mara had 52 acres. That was still a limitation. But for the first time in her life, she understood that it was also something else. She could see the whole place. Every morning, she moved cattle before a paddock looked finished. She left grass behind. That had felt wasteful in April. In August, it shaded the soil. The rested paddocks were not lush. Nothing in the county was lush. But when Mara pushed her boot through the standing grass, there was still cover underneath. The soil was cooler. The troughs kept cattle distributed instead of stacked around one pond. The fenced bank still held vegetation. The pond dropped, but it did not turn into a trampled bowl of mud. And every morning, as the sun came over the barn, dragonflies lifted out of the reeds. Not millions, not magic, just thousands of small predators taking whatever insects the drought had left for them. The 11 calves, now nearly yearlings, kept gaining. Slower than spring, but still gaining. That mattered. Elena came out in August and brought a soil thermometer. At 2 in the afternoon, she measured exposed ground near the old sacrifice lot. Then she measured soil under residual grass in a rested paddock. The difference was more than 20 degrees. She took photos. She clipped forage samples. She copied weight records from Mara's yellow notebook. "You've got 2 years in here?" "Almost." "Every move?" "Most of them." "Rainfall?" "Back page." Elena stared at her. "What? Do you know how many people tell me they have a grazing system?" Mara waited. "Then I ask for dates." That fall, Elena asked whether she could include Quinn Ranch in a county drought resilience report. Mara said yes. Wade heard about it before the report existed. 3 days later, people began asking questions about Mara's pond. Not to her. Around her, was standing water attracting mosquitoes? Was runoff from cattle reaching the creek? Were there rules about creating wildlife habitat beside livestock? Somebody said all those insects had to be a disease risk. Somebody else said the county ought to inspect it. Mara knew where the questions had started. She also knew knowing and proving were different things. So when the county truck came through her gate 2 weeks later, she opened it all the way. 2 inspectors stepped out, one from environmental health, one from the local conservation office. Mara gave them the notebook, then the veterinary records, then the water test. She showed them the fenced pond bank, the stabilized cattle access point, the trough system, the drainage area, the quarantine lot, the chemical cabinet, the grazing map. They stayed almost 3 hours. One inspector asked who had designed the pond buffer. "Nobody." "You just left it?" "Elena Park told me not to mow everything to dirt." He nodded. At the end, they found one cracked lid on a mineral tub that needed replacing. That was it. No runoff violation. No mosquito citation. No livestock issue. No illegal wildlife activity. The written note said the pond vegetation appeared to be reducing bank erosion and filtering surface runoff. The report became public the following Monday. By Tuesday, half the county knew. Wade Mercer did not stop by Mara's fence for almost a month. Then Ross called. Mara was in the barn sorting receipts when her phone rang. "I found your ear tag." She sat down. Ross continued. "Actually, a friend of mine found it." "You remember Hollow Creek cattle?" The name hit her before he finished. Hollow Creek had been a small seedstock herd north of Abilene. Not famous, not nationally advertised, but serious cattle people knew the name. The owner, Harold Vance, had spent more than 20 years selecting moderate-framed females that stayed fertile in heat, raised calves without heavy supplementation, and held condition when forage got rough. Mara remembered him now. Quiet man. Wire glasses. Never wore a clean hat. Ross told her Vance had died the year before. His family dispersed the herd in several groups. Some registered cattle went through private sales. Others, especially younger females whose paperwork had not been sorted, moved through brokers. The 11 heifers had apparently been part of one of those groups. Are they registered? Not exactly. Mara felt herself come back down. Ross laughed. Hold on. The tag numbers matched the breeder's internal herd records. 9 of the 11 could be traced to dams from 2 of Vance's most consistent maternal families. The remaining 2 were still being verified. That did not make them priceless. It did not turn them into show cattle. It did something more useful. It explained what Mara had been watching all year. The feet, the rib, the recovery, the way they held flesh, the way their gains had slowed during drought but never collapsed. Elena added their weight data to the county report. Then she compared it with forage use and supplemental feed. The numbers were good. Good enough that other producers started asking questions. The first buyer offered Mara $18,000 for all 11. She said no. 2 weeks later, Wade Mercer's ranch manager called. He was polite. Wade had lost several older cows during the drought and culled harder than planned. He needed replacement females. He had heard about the Hollow Creek connection. $30,000. Cash. Pick up whenever Mara wanted. No. The manager paused. You want a counter? No. You don't want to sell? That's right. 3 weeks passed. The drought broke with a hard October rain that turned the barn roof into a drum. Water ran into the stock pond through grass instead of bare dirt. By morning, the pond had risen 4 inches. Mara walked down there before breakfast. Dragonflies clung wet and motionless to the reeds. By noon, they were flying again. That afternoon, Wade Mercer drove through her gate. Not past it. Through it. He parked beside the barn and shut the truck off. Mara was sorting mineral sacks. She did not walk out to meet him. He came to her. Wade looked older than he had at the sale barn. Not weak, just tired in the way a hard year makes everybody honest around the eyes. The 11 heifers were in the paddock behind Mara. They had grown into deep-bodied young females with clean legs and smooth coats. Nothing about them looked like the pen of half-starved calves from August. Wade watched them for a long time. 45,000. Mara rested her hand on the gate. For all 11? All 11. That's a lot of money. It is. You said they were veterinary bills. Wade looked at the cattle. I remember, and that they'd eat me out of grass. I remember that too. Mara waited. Wade had spent his life in negotiations where whoever spoke first after an offer usually gave something away. So had Mara. He looked toward the pond. Dragonflies were working the edge in the late light, catching insects over the grass. Finally, Wade said, I was wrong about the cattle. Mara nodded once. Anything else? He looked at her then. That was the harder part. The cattle were easy. Cattle do not care who was embarrassed. I figured you were playing ranch. Mara said nothing. I figured 50 acres and a vet clinic job didn't add up to much. Still nothing. Wade glanced back at the heifers. I was wrong about that too. There it was. Not an apology exactly, but close enough that Mara did not need to drag him the rest of the way. They're not for sale. Wade exhaled through his nose. Not for 45? Not as a group. Why? Because I didn't spend a year learning what they can do so somebody else can build the herd. He looked at her. Mara explained the plan. She would keep the best 6 or 7 as foundation females. She would breed them to a moderate-framed bull selected for the same kind of low-input performance. If the first calf crop proved out, she would sell bred females and a limited number of replacement heifers. Slowly, with records. She had no interest in turning 11 good cattle into one large check and starting over. Wade listened. Then he smiled a little. Not the sale barn smile. A different one. You've thought about this. For about 11 months. He put both hands on the top rail. If you ever sell females, call me. I'll put you on the list. Wade looked at her. Behind who? Mara let him sit with that one. He laughed. Just once. Then he shook her hand and left. The county drought report came out that winter. Quinn Ranch was not presented as a miracle. Elena made sure of that. It was presented as a small acreage case study, short duration grazing, longer recovery periods, distributed water, protected soil cover, reduced bank disturbance, consistent records, adaptive stocking. The dragonflies got one paragraph. Mara liked that. The Conservation District offered Quinn Ranch a place in a demonstration program the following spring. It came with partial funding for permanent cross-fencing, another water line, and soil testing. 2 field days were scheduled. The first one made Mara nervous. 43 people showed up. Some had hundreds of acres. Some had 20. A few were men who had laughed at the auction. Nobody mentioned that. They asked where she put the trough, how long she rested the south paddock, how much hay the 11 heifers had eaten, how she decided when to move cattle, whether the pond buffer caused weeds, whether dragonflies really reduced mosquitoes. Mara gave the same answer every time someone tried to turn the dragonflies into the story. They help. Then she would point at the grass. But this is the story. The money changed slowly. That was how real ranch money usually changed. Not in one giant moment. In smaller things that stopped going wrong. Her hay bill was lower than she had expected. Her heifers held condition. The first 6 calved without trouble. 5 raised calves that weaned heavier than Mara's ranch average. 1 did not. Mara wrote that down too. She sold 2 bred females the following fall for more than she had paid for all 11 calves. She kept the rest. The bank refinanced part of her operating note after 2 years of cleaner numbers. She replaced the failing pump at the well. She bought a used squeeze chute that did not require 3 people and a bad word to close. She never got rich. She stopped feeling like one broken tractor could end the ranch. That was better. A year and 6 days after the auction, Mara walked back into the Cedar Ridge sale barn. Same fans. Same wooden seats. Same auctioneer clearing his throat between lots. She needed 3 bred cows and had come early enough to look at them in the pens. When she walked into the seating area, a rancher she barely knew moved his jacket off the bench. Got room here. Mara sat. A few minutes later, the auctioneer saw her. How are those Hollow Creek girls doing, Mara? Doing fine. Still got all of them? Most. Wade Mercer sat 3 rows ahead. He turned at the sound of her name. For a second, the room felt exactly like it had the year before. Then Wade nodded. Mara nodded back. That was all. No speech. No public apology. No one needed one. A group of thin calves came through late that afternoon. Not as bad as hers had been. Still rough. 2 men behind Mara started making jokes. Wade looked over his shoulder. Check the feet before you laugh. The jokes stopped. Mara looked down at her sale sheet so nobody would catch her smiling. She bought 2 cows that day. Nothing dramatic. Good cows. Good cows. Fair price. She hauled them home as the sun dropped behind the hills. At the ranch, the pasture was rested and knee-high in places after spring rain. The Hollow Creek females were moving toward the evening paddock with their calves beside them. The stock pond reflected the orange sky. Along the bank, Cattails and sedges leaned over the water. Mara shut off the truck and stood there for a minute. At first, there were only a few dragonflies. Then the light shifted. She saw more. Blue ones over the water. Red ones over the grass. Small black-winged damselflies sitting along the reeds. Hundreds became visible once she stopped trying to count them. They had been there the whole time. The dragonflies had never saved the ranch. They had never saved 11 calves. Dr. Ross had helped save those calves. Medicine had helped. Hay had helped. Clean water had helped. Mara checking them twice a day when nobody was watching had helped. The grass stayed because she stopped asking how much she could take from a pasture and started asking how long it needed before she came back. The pond improved because cattle stopped standing in it every afternoon. The soil held moisture because she stopped grazing every blade down to the dirt. The cattle improved because problems were handled while they were still small enough to handle. The dragonflies were simply what people could see from the road. They were the bright, moving proof that something underneath had changed. A year earlier, Wade Mercer had watched Mara pay $500 for 11 calves and told a room full of people she had bought 11 veterinary bills. Now 6 of those heifers were raising calves of their own. The ranch still had a mortgage. The summer would still get hot. Something would still break. Rain would come when it wanted to. None of that had changed. What had changed was that Mara no longer needed the land to behave like 6,000 acres. She had finally learned how to make 52 acres work like 52 acres. And as the last light settled over the pond, the dragonflies lifted above the water again, thousands of wings catching the sun for a second before disappearing into the grass.